Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. I am Felrus, sailing the seas of Raid Shadow Legends today. Guys, today we are going to be talking about a very important, a very game-changing class of champions, and that is going to be the buff strippers, guys. The buff strippers themselves. These champions are so useful all around the game. Arena, Hydra, Doom Tower, especially Dark Fae, right? You can get use out of buff strippers pretty much everywhere you go. They are so important. They are so fun to play with because they all do the buff strip in a variety of different ways, guys. Today, we are going to be rating all my buff strippers from S tier to F tier as far as their buff strip skill goes. So I'll rate their skill and then I will rate them as a champion if you are using them for the purpose of buff stripping. Hey you, stop right there. Click the link in the description below to get a free Corrado as well as Fane, Ugo, and Vergus as you level up your account in Raid. Here's exactly how to do it. Log out of Clarion Play on PC and uninstall. Click the link in the description below and register with a brand new email. Log in and complete the tutorial. You'll find Corrado in your inbox as well as Fane, Ugo, and Vergus as you level up. If you're looking for a great start in Raid, this is your chance. Make sure you get your free Corrado as well as 3 free epics by clicking my link right away. First on the list, we've got Blade Chorister Caldor. Now, Caldor has the buff strip on his A3 here. Attacks one enemy before attacking, has a 100% chance of removing all buffs from the target and placing a 60% decreased defense debuff and a 25% weaken debuff on the target for 2 turns. Will ignore 20% of the target's resistance for each continuous heal buff on the champion. This is probably a high B, low A tier buff strip. You can make an argument that it's a high A tier buff strip, and the reason is because it ignores resistance. It ignores resistance based on the number of continuous heals on him. He's got a bunch of continuous heals on his A2, so he can throw out continuous heals. He'll boost his turn meter when he gets continuous heals on this skill, and then he'll go in and buff strip and drop a decreased defense and weaken. He'll ignore resistance, and that's the big thing with this. It's really good against bosses, and if you have 3 faction allies and the initial target is under a poison, he'll also attack other enemies. Damage is proportional to the initial target's max HP and how many poison debuffs are on them. So you can kind of do a big old nuke, right? But you know, yeah, he'll buff strip one target. Really good against bosses particularly, and then he'll attack everybody else. Usually if it's a wave, he'll wipe the wave. So probably a high B, low A tier buff strip in my opinion. Queen of Hearts has, and also as a champion, if you're using him as your buff stripper, I mean, he's okay. He's okay as your buff stripper for wave-based content, PvE content, Hydra, all that kind of stuff. I'll give him a B. I'll give him a B as a buff stripper for most PvE content. He's very good, and he brings a lot other than his buff strip as well. Enemy max HP, drop defense, weaken, AoE A1, turn meter fill, damage boosting, damage ramping, all that kind of stuff. All right, Queen of Hearts. Her buff strip is it's not a hit, so it removes all buffs from all enemies, then places a death brand debuff on the initial target for 2 turns, also places a true fear debuff on all enemies for 1 turn, fills this champion's turn meter by 5% for each buff removed by this skill. This is definitely a high A tier buff strip, in my opinion. She's got a death brand, and a death brand just places a block revive on anybody who is killed while under death brand. Then she's got AoE crowd control, which is true fear, which is really good, combos very nicely with Fabian as well. And then she has turn meter fill for herself for each buff removed by this skill. This is definitely a high A tier buff strip, and Queen of Hearts as your buff stripping champion is definitely an S tier. She's definitely an S tier. She's got decreased defense on an AoE on her A1, and then turn meter fill on her A1. She's got an ally attack with increased attack, and she decreases the cooldown of her buff strip if she kills somebody with it. And then she has a built-in supersonic set. For every 10 buffs the enemy team receives, grants this champion an extra turn. If there are multiple champions on the team with this skill, only one will activate. So yeah, definitely a S tier champion. Quintus the Triumphing. Quintus, his buff strip is on his A2. So attacks one enemy, removes all buffs, then places a 60% decreased defense debuff on the target for 2 turns before attacking. These effects cannot be resisted or blocked. So unlike Caldor, who ignores proportional to how many continuous heals are on him, Quintus just has a buff strip that can't be resisted, which is really nice. And then we also need to include buff steals. I'm gonna count those as buff strips, so we'll get there pretty soon. So yes, he's got an irresistible buff strip. It's only on a single target, so I definitely give this a low B tier buff strip. It can't be resisted, which is nice in a pinch, but it can be blocked, I think, by Stone Skin. I think it can be blocked by Stone Skin, yeah. So, and then he's got an AoE for the rest of his kit. He's got increased attack, increased crit damage on himself, reset the cooldown of the buff strip if it kills somebody. In addition, he also resets the cooldown of his AoE if his A2 kills somebody, and then he's got place an extra hit if the target has no buffs. If the attack is critical, repeats the attack once. So, potential quad hitter A1. And then his passive, each of this champion skills deals additional pure damage. The amount of pure damage dealt is equal to 10% of the target's max HP for each buff on them. Additional pure damage dealt will ignore shield buffs. If you're going to use this guy as a buff stripper, I definitely give him a low B tier. However, Quintus, I give probably an A tier as a champion. I think he's a very good champion. Esme the Dancer. Esme the Dancer has her buff strip on her A3 with increased accuracy and increased speed on all allies for 2 turns, 75% chance of removing all buffs from all enemies. If Moto of the Peels on the same team, has a 75% chance of stealing all buffs from all enemies instead. This is an alright buff strip. It's definitely probably a high B tier. The buffs are nice, increased accuracy, increased speed. Then she's got a buff strip, which is really good. As far as Esme goes, I definitely give her probably a high B, low A tier as a champion. She's got weaken and block buffs. She's got increased attack on all allies on her A1, and then she boosts the ally with the highest attack turn meter by 50%. She's a very good champion, and her buff strip makes her all the better, right? Makes her all the better. Los and Coleth. I wasn't even aware that this guy stole buffs or anything. Let's see. Before attacking, oh, yeah, on his faction ally on his A3, with one faction ally before attacking also removes all buffs from the target enemy. This effect cannot be resisted if the target has attacked this champion before this turn. Honestly, this is like, depending on the use case, this is really niche. I give this a C tier as a buff strip. If you're using this guy as your buff strip champion, he is also a C tier, although I give probably Lawson probably a B tier as a champion himself. Armand's the Magnificent. His buff strip is on his A3. For my next trick, places a sheep debuff on an enemy for 1 turn. This debuff cannot be blocked, then has a 75% chance of removing all buffs from all enemies. Fills this champion's turn meter by 5% for each buff removed. So this is an S tier buff strip. He's got sheep, then he's got turn meter fill, and an AoE buff strip, all on one skill. And yes, you can use him as your buff strip champion. He is an S tier for that as well. One of the better buff strips on my account for sure. Kymar's A2 has the buff strip, attacks all enemies, removes all buffs, places a sleep debuff for 1 turn. Very, very solid. Definitely a high A tier buff strip. He's got it on an AoE, and he has crowd control with it. The one thing you have to be aware of is you can weak hit. It's not very affinity friendly, but yeah, he's got a sleep. He's got a buff strip. Very good. If you're going to use this guy as your buff strip champion, I give him a high B just because of the affinity friendliness of that. But, as a champion himself, he's probably a high A tier, low S tier champion because of his cooldown reset. Now, let's see. Let's go with Lady Kimi. Not a lot of these. Some of these guys don't count. Lady Kimi, on her A3, she has the buff strip. Removes 1 random buff from each enemy, then has a 75% chance of placing a block buff debuff for 2 turns on enemies who have buffs removed. Also fills the turn meters of all allies by 15%, and places a 50% increased accuracy buff and a 30% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns. This is a tier, mid A tier to high A tier buff strip. The reason I say that is because it's only 1 buff. So it's really good for like removing Stone Skin or Veils or shields at the start of an arena fight, but it's not particularly helpful for like an AoE full buff strip. She also has turn meter fill on everybody, increased accuracy and increased speed. Yeah, so it's a very solid skill, but it is not an true AoE buff strip. She does have block buffs with that, which is really good because she decreases turn meter whenever she places a debuff. So this is a very solid skill. So definitely mid to high A tier. Prisma. So Prisma has, let's see, he has a buff strip on his A2. Attacks one enemy before attacking, removes all buffs from the target. The ally with the highest crit damage will team up and join the attack. The ally joining the attack will use their default skill and ignore 35% of the target's defense. By the way, Kimi is definitely a high A, low S tier champion. Prisma, his buff strip skill is, you're going to want to go first with this guy most of the time. And he also has a buff conversion. He'll take buffs and convert them into the inverse debuff, which is really good. This skill is probably a low B, high C tier skill, but this skill here, the ally attack skill, is probably a high, as far as the buff strip goes, I mean, it's probably a high B tier, low A tier. And the only reason I say that is because, you know, Stone Skin has a chance to block and it's not an AoE. But it's really good because he'll give someone an instant turn if the ally attack kills someone, which is really, really nice. If you're going to use Prisma as your buff stripper, he definitely gets a high B tier as your buff stripper. Geomancer. Is Geomancer really an arena one? Nah, but we can still rate him. He has the buff strip on his A2, removes all buffs from a target enemy, then attacks them. It's okay. It's really good against bosses. It's really good in single target situations. It's not the best in the world, maybe a high B tier. And if you're going to use Geomancer as your buff stripper, he's probably a high B tier for that. But, you know, of course, Geomancer is an S tier champion. Let's see, are there anybody else using the Maroon has a buff strip here? He has a 100% chance of removing 2 random buffs from all enemies. For Faction Wars, this is like A tier. Anywhere else, this is kind of mid. So it depends. I'll give it a C tier for that. And then Seer, if you're going to use him as your buff strip champion, again, in Faction Wars, it is like S tier. Because this dude is fantastic in S tier. And then Seer, I think, yeah, she removes buffs from you, but she converts that into damage to the enemy. So definitely an S tier champion. You can't use her the same way you would any of those other buff strippers, but she's definitely S tier for what she does. Now, we also have to go ahead and look at steal buffs. So, stealing buffs. We first have Frolny, who has it on his A2 on his first form, attacks one enemy, steals 2 buffs from a target enemy. This effect cannot be resisted if the attack is critical, repeats the attack once. This is an S tier buff stealing move. You're going to get 4 buffs that can't be resisted. That's awesome. Adeline has it on her A1. Oh, and Frolny, if you're going to use him for that purpose, he is definitely an S tier champion. Adeline on her A1, attacks one enemy, 50 books to 75% chance of transferring 1 debuff from this champion to the target. Also has a 50% chance of stealing 1 random buff from the target. It's really mid. I'll give it a low C tier. And Adeline, if you're going to use it, unless you're early game, definitely a low C tier. Loki the Deceiver. Is that here? Target is an enemy? No, I don't know. Stealing all buffs. Oh, yeah. So it's on his A3. 75% chance of stealing all buffs from a target enemy and 100% of their turn meter. Effects cannot be resisted if this champion is under Veil or Perfect Veil. If the target's turn meter was not stolen, fills the turn meters of all allies by 15% instead. Loki, don't have too much experience with Loki. I would give it this like a low B tier as far as a buff strip is concerned. It's not on an AoE. It can't be resisted if he's under Veil or Perfect Veil, but definitely a low, somewhere in the B tier. I think this skill falls. And if you're going to use him for that, definitely low B tier, I think. Sun Wukong. All right, Sun Wukong has it on his A3. Attacks all enemies before attacking, steals all buffs from all enemies, and places a block buffs debuff on them for 2 turns. This is fantastic. Definitely a high A tier buff steal, right? And then he's got block buffs, which is really, really good. Let's see. Hatter, Mad Hatter, on his A1, attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 25% chance of stealing 1 random buff. Each hit also has a 75% chance of applying a debuff spread effect, taking 1 random debuff from the target and placing it on all enemies under a hex debuff. This is really good for Hydra. 25 books to what is that? A 50% chance of stealing a random buff on each hit. It's all right. Definitely a high B tier buff strip because he's also got that debuff spread effect, right? Let's see. Contra, just a bunch of these guys have A1s. Morrigan has a single target buff steal. It's definitely a B tier skill, and if you're going to use her for that, it is just that. Arashi the Riptide, A1, usually has a 75% chance, books 100% chance of stealing a random buff. It's okay. It's nothing great. Definitely B tier as well. I think that's where most of these champs are going to fall. Scartorsus has it on his A1 as well. 50% chance of stealing 1 random buff from each enemy. It's low B tier as well. Guys, these, and if you're going to use him for that, specifically for that purpose, yeah, he's also very low B tier. I like him for other things, but not for that. Guys, this has been me rating all my buff strippers, buff stealers, and both, you know. Let me know which of your buff stealers, buff strippers is your favorite in the comments below. I've been Felrus, sailing the seas of Raid Shadow Legends, and I will see you in another video.